Hello everyone, my name is John Gidcumb. My project is on India Blackouts 2012. I apologize for this headset. I tried recording with my mic from my laptop and it did not sound well at all. Hoping this sounds better. Introduction. A little bit about India blackouts. What are they? There are two blackouts that occurred on July 30th, 2012 and July 31st, 2012 on two consecutive nights back to back. The first blackout affected about 400 million people, and the second blackout affected about 600 million people. And these blackouts were preventable due to lack of oversight. Blackout number one, what was it? Large blackout, affected about 400 million people in the northern region, affecting about 8 states at approximately 2:30 in the morning. As we see this image here, it shows the different power regions in India. We have the north region, the east region, and the west region, and the south region. Specifically, we're going to be talking about the north region as where most of the blackouts occurred, but the west region and the east region also play a part in the blackouts as well. So why did the blackouts occur? In simple terms, because the frequency dropped to about 49.68. But in more detail, if you look in the table to the right, you can see the underdraw and overdraw of multiple power plants within the grid. And this is the real reason that the frequency dropped and that we had the blackout in the first place. So here we see two power flow systems. On the left, it is at approximately 2 a.m. before the blackout when things are still operational. And on the right-hand side, at approximately 2:30, right when the blackout occurs. As you can see, the difference in schedule and actual is huge. And this is why the blackouts occurred. If you look detailed, if you look at the west region to the east region, you can see that how much power the west region is sending to the east region because they're trying to reroute it to the east, to the north. The north is consuming so much power and the west is trying to get it there, but the transmission lines aren't capable of it. So they're having to split some power from the west to the north and some power from the west to the east to the north. Here we see the frequency profiles. On the left-hand side, we see a couple of hours before the blackout. On the right-hand side, we see just about 30 seconds before the blackout. On the left-hand side, we can see how unstable this frequency is for hours before the blackout occurs. On the right-hand side, we can see how quickly the blackout occurs. It only takes about 12 seconds for that frequency to drop about 6 hertz. And as we can see in the yellow line, those lines are actually the power grids that weren't affected by the blackout, that were still operational. And I wanted to point those out because, as you can see, once the blackout occurs, the frequency increases to almost about 51 hertz. Now, this is a pretty big deal because they're very lucky that the blackout did not occur in the western and eastern regions too, with the frequency increasing like that. And we're going to talk about that a little bit more of why the frequency increased so much and why it didn't come back down to 50 like it's supposed to. So blackout number one, a detailed explanation. All this information is coming from the official CERC document that was filled out in response to the blackouts by the government. So what you see in quotes are direct quotes from that document, and what you see in bold are my interpretations of those quotes. So I'm just going to read the bold. You can feel free to pause this video and read the quotes. So reason number one, the north was consuming too much power and producing too little. And the west was consuming too little and producing too much. And as you imagine, the west is trying to give that extra power to the north, but there are reasons why that did not work out. So number two, north power plants were out, which is why they weren't producing enough power. They actually had one power plant that was out for scheduled maintenance, and then they had another one go out for emergency maintenance. So they weren't producing enough, and they were consuming more than expected. Number three, there was actually a power plant in the north that was planned to go operational on August 1st. And so they were running trial runs, turning it off and on, which was injecting reactive power into the system that they were just not prepared for. Number 4, the western region had to shut down lines for maintenance and were prepared for a heavy load to the north, not from the north. So as we stated before, the western region was producing too much power, and so they were trying to give it to the north, who needed it. But the problem they ran into is that the transmission lines weren't capable of transmitting that much power. And not only that, a lot of lines were down for maintenance. There were some that were down for scheduled maintenance, and there were other that went down for emergency maintenance because they were trying to push so much power through it. So how they were able to fix the first blackout, in quite simple terms, they got power from the neighboring eastern western grid. They provided power to central loads. Then they self-started the hydro generators, which is able to provide power to emergency loads, such as railways, metros, airport, which got it back on grid at approximately 8 in the morning. And that is 6.5 hours later. And then lastly, they were able to start up the thermal power generators, which provided 40% of the load by about 10 a.m., but the entire grid was not fully restored until about 4 p.m., which is about 12 hours or 14 hours. So blackout number 2 is the largest blackout in history, affecting about 620 million people in 21 states in one union territory in the North and East region. It occurred at about 1 p.m. Remember, they got the grid restored at about 4 p.m. the previous day, and by 1 p.m. the next day it was blacked out again. So why did it happen? In simple terms, the frequency got down to about 49.8. More detail, as you can see in the table, the underdraw and overdraw of these power plants again. So here we have the power system flow for blackout 2. Again, on the left-hand side, you have before the blackout when things are operational at about 12:30. And the right-hand side, you have right when the blackout occurred at about 1 p.m. And you can see the difference in schedule and actual again. You can see how much power the west is trying to route from the east to the north and from the west to the north, almost triple what they're scheduled to be doing. So again, for blackout 2, we have the frequency profile. On the left-hand side, we have a few hour span showing the unstable frequency is really unstable there. And on the right-hand side, we have a zoomed in of about 1.5 minutes there showing the frequency drop. And as you can see, there's actually about 2 drops there. And also you can see the different color lines. As I mentioned before, this is important because the areas that were not affected by the blackout were not compensating for their frequency changes like they're supposed to be. So a detailed explanation for the blackout 2, quite simply, is the same exact thing. Nothing changed from the first blackout. The north was consuming too much, producing too little. The west was consuming too little, producing too much. The north power plants are out still. There are still those unplanned changes in the system from that power plant that was testing and injecting reactive power into the system. And again, the western region transmission lines are down for maintenance and were not capable of transmitting that heavy load to the north. But I did add a little quote here. It says, and I think this is very important, before the disturbance, despite requests from the WRLDC to SIPAT for reducing generation and thereby relieve high loading in the transmission corridor, the generating plant refused to do the same on account of imminent commercial declaration that power to the northern region was flowing via the available western to north interregional links as well as via the western eastern north route. AKA, they knew they were producing too much power and they said it's okay because we're going to reroute it, but it didn't work because the line still couldn't handle it. So how they fixed it was pretty much the same way they did for the first blackout. They got power from the eastern western grids, provided power to the essential loads, self-started the hydro generation, supplied to emergency loads, and then they started up the thermal power stations being fully restored by about 9:30. They did this one a lot quicker, maybe about 8 hours, but still a long time. So this is the big picture. Again, none of this is coming from me. This is coming from the official CERC document and their reasons for why the blackouts occurred. Reason number one is skewed load generation balance across the regional grids. This is what I've been mentioning and what you're seeing in the table, and that is producing too much power, producing too little power, consuming too much power, and trying to transport that power across the country is not the ideal situation. The ideal situation is you're producing as much power as you need and you consume that power. Grid indiscipline. This is a big one. This is the government regulations, and this is probably the main reason, big picture of why the blackouts occurred. The government regulations that are set in place are just not enough, and they have penalties, but they're just not enough. These companies, they know what they're doing. They know they're not following the regulations, but they don't care because the penalties aren't high enough, and they're just continuing to do it over and over and over again. Failure of defense mechanisms. The self-healing mechanisms was yet to be implemented. These are the same self-healing mechanisms that we've learned in class. They realized that they needed these, and they were in the process of implementing them, but they had yet to be implemented. If they had these, then the generators that weren't affected could have gotten down to a nominal rate and possibly could have stopped this problem from happening in the first place, although not entirely. Absence of primary response from generators. This is what I've mentioned before. The generators that weren't affected by the grid getting up to approximately 50.95 hertz. They're very lucky that the rest of the grid did not experience a blackout, which is very important because the reason that they were able to get the grid back up and running was by using power from the north and from the east. And had those had a blackout too, it would have taken a lot longer for them to get the grid back up and running. It would have been a lot harder. Inadequate appreciation of transport capability. Since 2003, concerns have been expressed regarding the difference in the transfer capability, the transmission capacity, and the legitimacy of reliability margins. This is saying that they knew that those lines weren't capable of transmitting that much power long before this, almost 9 years. The operators were concerned on increase in the loading of the western north interregional links. This is saying the engineers knew. The engineers knew that the lines couldn't handle it, but the company did it anyways. However, even as the collective actions taken for curtailment of the overdraw in the northern region and reduction of injection in the western region were being taken, multiple contingencies occurred in a short span of time. This is saying they tried, but it was too late and shit happened. They thought they could fix it, but this is exactly what the engineers knew were going to happen. So the solutions to these problems per problem, starting from the top, skewed load generation balance across the regional grids. They really need new regulations for this. They need the regulations in place to force people to consume how much they're scheduled to consume, produce as much as they're scheduled to produce. Then grid and discipline, they need higher penalties for those regulations. Once the better regulations are in place, they need penalties to force these companies into following it. If the penalties aren't high enough and it's cheaper for them just to let these problems happen, oh, they will. So they're going to have to be forced via high penalties to actually follow these regulations. Failure of defense mechanisms. They really need to install these self-healing mechanisms. Again, that costs money, and maybe that's what these penalties are for, to give incentive to these companies to install these types of mechanisms. Inadequate appreciation of transfer capability. AKA, they need to pay better attention. They need to listen to their engineers. And as power engineers, it is our job to make them listen and make them aware of these problems. So in conclusion, if there's any takeaways from the India blackout, it's number one, it's regulations and government oversight. It's extremely important. Working at California ISO, may not seem like what we went to school for, but without these regulations, these types of problems are going to persist, and we're not going to have the stable power grid that we have today. Number two is smart grid, self-healing. These mechanisms are new, but they're extremely important to the grid, and without, or if they had these self-healing mechanisms, this problem may have not occurred in the first place. Number three is maintenance. Again, maintenance is something that most people aren't concerned about, most people aren't thinking about, and companies sure as hell don't want to do. unless they're forced to do. But again, have the right maintenance been put into place? These transmission lines, since they knew since 2003, they had 9 years to fix these transmission lines. Had they fixed them, this entire problem may not have occurred. Backup systems. This is something that was talked about in the CERC document as a possible solution, but something that I haven't mentioned yet. And quite simply, the North had 2 power plants that went down, one scheduled, one emergency. And what the backup systems is saying is that the North would have had more power plants than it needed. If it could have had 3 extra or 4 extra, then they would not have had to import that power from the West or the East. They could have provided their own power by flipping those generators back on or telling them to produce more power. So that's what backup systems is, having more power plants than you need for situations like this. Well, that's the end of my presentation. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I thank you for listening. My last slide is references. My only reference is the official CERC document. Feel free to check it out. I hope you do. It's about 130 pages long. It's a bit lengthy, but it is very interesting. I will try to upload my presentation so that you can copy and paste this link. But if not, please feel free to pause the video. And thank you again for your time.